Lee, the last time we talked, it was your freshman college season, and you placed second to Chuck Yagla. Didn't get the NCAA championship you wanted, but going into your sophomore season, what kind of things did you do to get prepared to get on track to the career that and eventually ended up being three NCAA championships? But you had to get your first. What kind of things did you do to get ready for that sophomore season?
That's a great question. I the first thing, my coaches knew what my goals were. And Russ Hullickson was a big part of that because he was an example to the whole team because he was, aspiring to make the Olympic team in 1976, which was my sophomore year. So he was training, and Ben Peterson was in the room, Olympic champ. Uh, John Peterson would come occasionally. So anyway, I really am proud of what uh, our coaches created that environment. So I worked out with Russ quite a bit because he was the closest thing that I had to a guy who had experienced the world level. I guess the biggest thing is I was very serious. I was very disciplined. I just excluded everything from my life that could be a deterrent or distraction. And not that everyone's got to do this, but I didn't date or anything. I very rarely went out. In fact, during the season, I didn't go out at all, really. And um, my roommates could feel it. It got to a point where they didn't even talk to me that much because they knew I wasn't really going to be communicating. Um, that My sophomore year, I had my own room. It was an apartment with two bedrooms, and in the past, each bedroom had two people in it. But this year, I wanted my own room so I could just not be distracted and totally withdraw and all that kind of stuff. But I was focused on that happening. And at that time, there wasn't that many three-time NCAA champions. That was a big deal, I guess. That was a big deal. And if I couldn't win four, then I had to win three. I felt desperate that I absolutely had to win three. Now, this sounds maybe arrogant or something, but if I hadn't won three, I would have felt like my career wasn't valid. I'd have felt like I failed really, even though I could have won, I mean maybe won two or maybe won one. I know how difficult it is to win one national title. Uh, my freshman year, no one had won four before that. So that was my goal, was to win four. And if I couldn't win four, then I absolutely had to win three. I mean, it just was like I would have felt like I was a failure if I didn't win three. Now that's just how I'm trying to frame how serious that was to me. That was the most serious thing in my life, and I kept it that way.
How much did that loss to Chuck Yagla, referee's decision, how much did that motivate you?
Oh, yeah, I'm laughing now, but I just hated to lose. Even, and I made sure the director of my documentary added a little emphasis to that. He talked about my childhood, and one of my childhood friends. He was a couple years older than me, but there's a scene in there where he talks about how I hated to lose. We play game, when you're a kid, you play games, whatever, in the card games, or you play in the street, you play different things. I was probably, I don't know, 12 or something, or 13. He talked about uh, Lee Kemp, Leroy. I was known Leroy back then. Hated to lose. So I'm framing this to say that when I had the opportunity to wrestle Chuck in the East-West All-Star match, I wasn't thinking about undefeated season. I wasn't thinking about anything. I didn't want to cut weight all year, so I went up to 58. Chuck stayed at 50, so I didn't have to really wrestle him. But as much as I hated cutting weight, and I made sure that was pointed out in my documentary too, my high school coach talked about how much I hated cutting weight. I'm framing it to say that I cut to 150 to wrestle him in the All-Star match. The All-Star match was at in Madison at the University of Wisconsin. Dwayne Clubman was the coach of that team. Not sure whether we're the, I guess we would have been the East team, and the West team was there was another coach, and they picked their lineup. So since my college coach was the coach of the East team, we had three Wisconsin wrestlers in that lineup. Jack Ryan won at 126, who ended up winning the national title too. Pat Christensen at 167, he ended up winning the national title that year. And myself at 58, but I cut to 50. I would have had to wrestle Paul Martin, and I had already, I wrestled him so much. I wrestled Paul Martin in the Iowa Junior Nationals. He took third, and Trella won it. So I wrestled him there, and I wrestled him a couple times my freshman year, and I just didn't see any point of wrestling him again because I'd already beaten him. I wanted to wrestle Chuck, so that's how important it was to me, competition. And I hated cutting weight. That let me know that there's no way I wanted to do that again because it was difficult to cut the weight. But I did, and I won 10-4 that time. So that satisfied in my mind that loss that I had. So that's how important that loss was to motivate me to want to even do that. And to my coach kind of tried to talk me out of it. He said, "Well, you sure you want to do that? I mean, you could lose to him, and then that could eliminate your undefeated season, which is what I want, was what I was going for." In the coaches meeting that I had with him in before the season, that's what I wanted, to go undefeated. And we felt, both of us felt I could do that. And here I'm cutting to 50 to wrestle this. And Chuck was a monster at 150. He was big, he was strong. He just didn't lose very much, and he was competitive. So that's what I wanted.
And Chuck ended up being the outstanding wrestler later that year at the NCAA Championship. So he had a great season too. So
Yeah.
you've talked often about Dan Gable and his influence. So you're in your sophomore season. You've wrestled Gable already at the Northern Open. When you're at Wisconsin, how much are you thinking about Gable and what he's doing at the University of Iowa as it compares to what you're doing?
And a lot. And I think I'll say that our coaches, Dwayne Clevin, I give him a lot of credit, and Russ, they were the ones that created the atmosphere, and they were the architect of that room. So that is just a real benefit that I had going there. For instance, Sam Komar was a good friend of mine from high school. We were from the same conference in high school, same grade. He went to the University of Indiana. To give you, I'm not trying to bash their program, but I mean, a lot of coaches weren't as organized as Dwayne Clevin. Sam Komar went to the national. He won the Big Ten as a freshman. He went to the national tournament both years with the coach not having things buttoned up completely. Rides weren't lined up. I mean, these guys were, he just didn't organize. The coach, Doug Buball, on the feet. He's passed away now, unfortunately. But when Sam would tell me stories of how they would go to dual meets late because the coach was whatever, it was shocking to me. But in particular, the national tournament. He went to the national tournament his freshman year with no arrangements on rides, workouts when they were. He hitchhiked to, the night before to make weight all by himself. And he goes to the national tournament the next morning, gets himself there. So I didn't have to worry about all that stuff. Dwayne Clevin was so organized. We had itineraries, typed out itineraries for us. And every away meet, we had practices that were available for us to typed up so we could see what practices were going to be. So the atmosphere was really at a high level. Wisconsin was, at that time, we were really ranked as high as number 2 in the country behind Iowa, and placed in the Big Ten behind Iowa several times that I was there, and had one dual meet where we should have beat Iowa, actually. It came down to the heavyweight match, and our heavyweight tied. had he won, which he could have won, should have won, we would have won the duel. So don't know if that answers the question completely, but um, I was in control of the environment and the atmosphere, but I give a lot of credit to our coaches that created that atmosphere too.
1976, Gable would have still been an assistant coach. Did you have interactions with him? Were you still utilizing him as a tool to get you better?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We worked out uh, a lot, I would say, about as much as you could, considering he was coaching at another place. But the Olympic trials were that year in Cleveland or somewhere, I can't remember where. But we had a lot of the practices for the Olympic team in Madison. They had a lot of mini camps throughout the country, and one key one was right where I was going to college. So there was that one. I talk about this almost every time I talk about Gable. Gable was there as I think he was an assistant in Iowa that year, and um, but he was constantly working out, and I worked out with him a lot. And we worked out one day in the after practice. It was like the Rocky story I like to talk about with Gable. That occurred during that year, during that period of time before the Olympics, and it happened during that training camp that was at Madison. So I worked out with him a lot, and he was always open and always gracious to work out with me. It was just words weren't really said. We didn't really communicate much. We didn't talk much. Uh, Very rarely. I don't think we even had a conversation really. We just worked out a lot. You know, he wanted to work out. I wanted to work out. When it was over, we went our separate ways.
When you're going through the season, could you tell that you were on track to win an NCAA championship? Were you in that space where you said, I'm on point, this is mine?
I would say, uh, I would say yes because I was undefeated, but so I couldn't foresee anything that I mean, the Big Ten's a pretty tough conference, so you wrestle pretty much everyone. However, the guy I wrestled though was from another conference, Tom Brown from the University of Washington, that 2 years earlier had beaten Yagla for third place in the national tournament. And Tom Brown redshirted my freshman year, and then so it was 2 years ago. So my freshman year he redshirted, um, and then my sophomore year he was wrestling at 158. He probably could have made 50. In fact, he told me that on the award stand. He told me he wished he would have went 150 because I guess he saw Chuck was there and maybe he thought he'd beaten him before. Maybe he'd have a good shot at beating Chuck. So, but he was an unknown. I had never. He was undefeated too, and I make that distinction that he and I were the only undefeated wrestlers that year in the NCAA tournament in Tucson, and I beat him. So I was the only undefeated wrestler that whole year in the Division I NCAA collegiate season.
When you go through your NCAA championships, you look at your match scores. It was 6-0, 12-4, 8-5, 4-1, 4-0. You've talked about your style and that you just did what you had to do to win and that wrestlers really were never a threat. Did you feel like you could have put out more and dominated even more at
Oh
that?
yeah, absolutely. I was cautious by nature. And funny, my son mentioned something to me just even yesterday about my cautious nature. And I thought about what he said. And this is totally different context. We were thinking about, he wanted me to try this one wheel thing that he does. And I just said, no. And no, whatever. I gave some excuses. Dad, you're too conservative. You should just, just branch out a little bit. And I thought about, and you bring that up now. It's funny. The one thing that I do want to bring up is, uh, even the 6-0 early, first or second match, those are really matches that I was in control of. I've seen wrestlers try to take more control of a match, score more points, and get in trouble doing it. Not that that's the only reason, but if you're going against somebody competitive like me, you're not going to just keep scoring on me. I'm going to get upset about it. And I've seen it happen where guys just man up and they just decide, you're not going to they just start wrestling way better than they were wrestling earlier in the match. And so the more superior wrestler ends up not being able to score anymore, but he tires himself out trying to get that major and all that kind of stuff. So to me, it's almost like showing off, and it's not. I'm not criticizing people that try to go after a lot of points. But the one thing that did happen, though, that came outside of my own efforts, and this is no disrespect to Dave Becker, because he and I are friends now, and he's actually helped me out in a couple of situations later on in life. Funny how you circle back around, and he jokes about me beating him in the national tournament. He pokes at man, I should but but anyway, I lifted him and slammed him, and it by today's standards, it was not a slam. I mean, I've seen guys get drilled and nothing happens, right? Um, Bubba Jenkins being one of them, wrestling Brett Metcalf. I mean, he got slammed. I see guys getting slammed now. I just picked him up, took him down to his back, and the referee called a slam. And Dave laid there in the mat for a while, like he was hurt. And the coach at Penn State, I think it was his last year, he was a legend. Cole was his last name, whatever, uh, of the Cole family of dynasty national champs and coaches. Uh, whatever his first name was, it was Cole. And thank God Andy Matter was the assistant coach. But I saw Cole walk on the mat and look at Dave, and his hands went like this to Dave, signaling to him, "You got this, man. You won the match." He was gonna, and Andy Matter walked in front of him, and I was just kneeling on the mat, just thinking, "Oh God, I'm not gonna win the national title," and I could just feel the weight of this referee taking that match from me like that. And Andy Matter, their two-time national champ, probably one of the most successful wrestlers that ever went through Penn State prior to the Kale dynasty. I heard his voice say, "Come on, Dave, you're wrestling. We're not going to win a match like that." And so this coach, I don't, he's passed away now and everything, but Bobby Douglas had a similar situation. But Bobby took the other road where his wrestler legitimately did slam the guy, but the other wrestler was the better, and so well, I think it was reversed the other way. Bobby's wrestler got slammed, and he was wrestling a better wrestler that was probably going to win the tournament. The guy just made a mistake, slammed him. So he could have won that match. Bobby made the wrestler go out for 1 second and then default it, just so that it wouldn't stop the progression of that more superior wrestler. Here you have a coach who was going to try to win a match that way. And it just let me know just how a match could be taken away from you outside of your own efforts. And it's not anything that I really did. It wasn't malicious. And I don't really even think it was a slam because Dave wrestled and it was not a problem. But if it wasn't for that coach, and Andy Matter, I think it was him. I'm almost sure it was him. Um, and I walked back on the mat when Dave walked back to the center. I thought, oh my gosh, the score was 8-5. It was close. And I would have had back points and a takedown that didn't happen. Instead, I gave up a penalty point. And so I just wrestled even more conservative just to win the match. And the next round, I had probably what I think probably the toughest guy in the tournament, Joe Zuspan. I think Joe Zuspan probably would have beat Tom Brown as well. But I won that match like 3-1 or something like that in the semis. And then the finals, Tom Brown, it was 4-0.
When you win your first NCAA championship, this is what you're striving for. You're already thinking of, I want three or else my career is a failure. What does it feel to win that first one?
It was a relief because of the weight of that match in the quarterfinals. I knew that it could have been over for me. I would have been devastated. So I was grateful. I'm a spiritual individual, and I just felt grateful for that. I don't know if I was being told something by the universe or whatever you want to, your God is in your life, but um, just I've always was sort of humble by nature, but that made me even more grateful, more humble, more appreciative of just of the success that I was having. And I knew that it wasn't a given or granted. it wasn't a given thing. It was something that you had to earn, of course, but had to be grateful for. So that was the Olympic year. So I was an alternate on the Olympic team that year too. I took second in the Olympic trials, and I beat Stan Desick in the actual Olympic trials tournament 7-5. Lost to Wade Chalice 6-1 or something like that. But I was on the ladder now, sitting at number two, and I went through the whole process. Ended up losing to Desick 2 matches in a row. Stan is definitely one of the greatest strategists and tacticians ever, and I learned a lot from him, not only from that match but later on. And Wade got injured in his first match with Stan. Stan made the Olympic team, so I got to work out with all those guys because I was the actual alternate. Because Wade got injured and left the camp, left everything, did defaulted in his final match. So I went through the whole Olympic process as the alternate. Got to go to Montreal, got all the gear and all that stuff. So it was pretty cool going through that. So I knew I was pretty close. So I knew that I just felt that I could be an Olympic champion from that experience. And Stan went on to win a bronze medal. I watched all the matches that he wrestled, and I believed in my heart that I could have probably done well too. Don't know how well, but so I was ready for 80. And then, so then we have my junior year. If I could say I had an off year, that might have been one off year for some reason, because I lost a match. And anytime you lose, that's got to be an off year, an off something. I lost in the Northern Open, the very first tournament of the year, to Pete Galea in the finals of the Northern Open. And that was shocking to me, my junior year. That was a wake-up call if there ever was one. The match with Becker, and then I lose one, so I knew it was possible. So I even got more serious. It was against a guy who had graduated from college already, so that match didn't count in my record, my collegiate record, but I knew I wasn't invincible, So I was very, very strategic and just very, very surgeon like, in terms of my technique. I wanted to make sure I was going to win every match, and so I didn't want to make any mistakes. And some of that's probably what fueled that style I had, maybe because I was so focused on doing something that was unusual, like to win 3 national titles or to win 4, or to have 109 consecutive victories without a loss. Which is what I ended up doing in my 4 years collegiately. And at that time, it was, the longest win streak in collegiate wrestling history. I did have the one tie, but that's not a loss. I had people point that out to me when I say that, but I'll take it. I'll take it. It wasn't a loss, so it still is the win streak, and the only loss was to a non-collegiate wrestler. In order to do that, you can't make any mistakes. You make one mistake and it could be over. I know Yanni had a couple hiccups that 2 year, but he ended up winning, because he put it together at the end. When you have that kind of pressure, it's more pressure that you put on yourself. And in some ways, I'd have maybe would have been freer had I lost a few times, to take that pressure off so I could just be free to wrestle. But I wanted to achieve some things that had never been done before.
Talking about your junior year, let's talk about going into that. You talked about the focus going into your sophomore season, that you just kind of maybe shut the world out a little bit. Did you do the same in your junior season?
Yeah. Yeah. After that loss, because that was early in the year, I got more focused. And I can remember telling some friends, some of which one was a young lady I had liked a little bit. And so I wanted her to see me wrestle. So I remember his early season tournament. I remember I gave her some free tickets. And here she comes to the meet in the finals, and I get beat. That was crazy. I thought to myself, maybe my focus wasn't where it should have been. That was another thing. I never revealed that before. But when I knew I was going to have this interview with you, I started thinking about that. Uh, don't know why that happened, but I got beat by Pete, and I beat Pete to make it to the finals of the NCAA NCAA championships my freshman year, several years earlier, you know, and Pete got his revenge, just like I got my revenge against Chuck the next year. Pete reminds me of that. Pete and I are good friends. He reminds me of that victory, which, you know, I don't blame him. I went over his house once, and he had the bracket chart of the Northern Open up in one of the rooms, and he pointed it out to me. So I saw it, and I'm like, it was all in good fun. Pete's a great guy, and he deserves that victory because he kicked my butt during that match too. So maybe my focus wasn't. Pete had a good year that year. I mean, he won the Midlands, beat Mike Frick, who was national champion and all that. But anyway,
But hearing you say all that, it strikes me that Lee Kemp, we would probably wouldn't be talking to you right now if you didn't have this absolute maniacal focus. I mean, where would you be without it?
oh my, I may not have won the state. I would not have won the state tournament. The state even goes back that far. I was so focused after leaving that camp in 1972, watching Dan Gable at the camp, having him drill on with me, watching him win the gold medal, coming off of a 500 season, my sophomore year, the Gable camp, and then the next year, junior year in high school, beating the defending state champion in the semifinals by 1 point, by a 15-second stretch of one move. But, you know, the rest of the match, I had to wrestle to not let him score and all that kind of stuff. But um, everything I had done in my training, which was just so individual, by myself training, you know, just for that one goal. Now going into college, having a higher goal, without having that type of focus and that type of expectations of myself, it wouldn't have happened like that. And I've seen guys enter college and they, you know, they place very high as a freshman, true freshman, third or whatever, maybe even second. You know, Randy Lewis took second in the national tournament as, you know, as a freshman to a great wrestler, Mike Land. And I'm not saying he only won two national titles, but he got hurt one year, and that could happen to anyone. So, and he had to beat some absolute amazing wrestlers to win, to beat Daryl Burley, one of his titles. So just because you do well as a freshman, you know, do well as a sophomore doesn't mean the next 2 years is going to be like I got beat in the finals by Pete Lee, and I was shocked by it. Really, I just couldn't believe it happened. So I just knew that it's always possible. So I took every match knowing that, you know, the reality is somebody could beat you, you know, like I beat Gable of all things. No one, absolutely no one, if you took a poll of every human being that knew anything about wrestling and even people that knew nothing about wrestling, I wouldn't have got one vote. Literally, I wouldn't have got one vote. No one in the whole arena thought I had a chance against him. My coaches, my roommates, they laughed at me. And I point that out because I went in that match with nobody. I just stayed to myself. I trained kind of me and Russ by myself because no one thought it was, and because I made the choice to want to stay at 58 to wrestle him, you know, and, you know, later I cut to 50 to wrestle Chuck. My coach knew I could make 50. He said, Lee, maybe you should cut to 50 for this match, for this tournament. You know, it's a home, you know, it's here in our gym. You could, you know, you don't have to travel, you know, you can make 50. Why don't you just go 50 and just win the tournament at 50 and just don't wrestle Gable? I guess he thought that would destroy his star pupil's confidence to get smashed by Gable. You know, people don't understand what that was like, you know, because they see Gable now as a 80, whatever, he's close to 80. I don't know how old he is, but heck, I'm 68. So I guess he's not quite 80, but still they see this old guy. They can't imagine him when he was young, like 26 or 22 to 26. And they just see this old guy and they can't. And I tell people when they try to go off in that direction with me, I say, imagine if you fighting a 26-year-old Mike Tyson when he was, I mean, that was the fear. Brett Metcalf had this reputation. People feared him because of the intensity he would put on you. Think of Gable at that time, the reputation that he had to go into that match with anything other than I'm going to get smashed. how does that happen? And so I pointed out because as I get older, I just don't want that emphasis to be not talked about because that was the atmosphere. And we had never had a sold out packed gym ever in our field house. People came from all over just to see Gable wrestle. That's how popular Dan Gable was. And they came to watch Gable. And then, of course, I had a little reputation building at the time, and people thought it'd be kind of a good match. So the gym was absolutely packed with, and a lot of Iowa fans, of course, they always come. So that was Gable's, uh, his kind of his first match back after he announced he was going to try out for the 76 Olympic team. And so the arena was just packed. You couldn't hear, whenever he would do something, you couldn't hear anything. So that was my first experience of wrestling in an environment like that. And one thing I'll note too, after the match was over, when I won the match, people were absolutely upset. They were like mad that I beat him. Some coaches, because a lot of coaches were there, because we wrestled all the Big Ten type of schools and that. And people were like so angry at me that my coach, Dwayne Clevin, ushered me out of the gym and took me to the locker room because people were like mad, saying all kinds of crazy stuff to me when I was walking by. So that I'm just trying to give you the level of intensity that that match created. Now that didn't come from Dan. Was very gentlemanly. He was very respectful. Uh, Not one hint of anything negative came out of him, out of his mouth, out of his mannerisms. He could have left the gym. He didn't. He stayed, got on the award stand, talked to people, talked to reporters, the whole bit. So, but that was the atmosphere of that particular match, and for me to want to at least perform well in that match showed that I was like my coach tells me, and I made sure this was in my documentary. Um, I showed up for the finals with my lucky singlet and stuff, and my coach pointed it out. Said, "Lee, you wore a different singlet. You wore the one that for the USA Junior World Team that you made a couple years earlier. I saw that you came mentally prepared, that you wanted to win that match." And he talked about him and Russ sitting in the corner coaching me, and they looked at each other and said, "My goodness, Lee really came here to win this match." So I want to point that out because for the people that maybe could gain some motivation from hearing this interview, some of the younger wrestlers, because you always have to beat a giant in order to become one yourself. And now we're in an era where freshmen go to college now, hit the ground running, and they're four-time champs right away. They're like I can't think of the current names. I'm sure you know them off the top of your head, but they're like Bo Bassett's one of them, or there's a couple other guys. Isn't there a high school guy that made the world team just recently? So these young wrestlers, they come out blazing. So how do you wrestle someone like that if you're not that guy and now you have to wrestle that guy? So my message to everyone is you can beat that guy. At least you have to put that thought into your head.